The major topic for week 1 will be what's often called the agricultural revolution. The invention of sedentary agriculture didn't occur in just one part of the world, but in many different locations worldwide all around 10,000 years ago, including the Near East, the central part of Africa, eastern and northeastern South America, Central America, the Asian Pacific, and parts of North America. We'll be focused on the Near East for the first 2 weeks of this course, and then we'll look at Central and North America. Prior to 10,000 years ago, all humans gathered food by foraging, aka hunting and gathering. There are some general features specific to foraging societies that you should know. Leadership is not permanent in these groups, so there is no chief or king. Instead, there are people who are respected and may step forward in a crisis or to lead others in a specific task, and they are only considered leader for that task during that time. They are not all-around leaders. Anthropologists generally call this kind of leadership authority, since it derives from experience and respect. People with authority do not force others to do what they say, but others follow them out of respect. Of course, there is no way to force others to do what you say in a foraging society. Labor is not specialized in foraging societies. So, everyone of the same gender and age pretty much does the same tasks. Children usually help their mothers and the other young women gather food while young men hunt, and elders help process food or look after children. The diet's extremely healthy, with vegetables forming most of the diet and lean meat the rest. Many diseases we fear would simply not have been present in these societies, including cavities, which would have been avoided with such an optimum diet. There are no specialists in any field except medicine and history, which is transmitted orally since books don't make sense for people who have to stay on the move. Foragers are not sedentary, since you have to move around to find a constant food supply. However, they don't wander aimlessly, but instead know where to go at what times of the year. Our image of foragers tends to be a group of people constantly on the move, facing starvation, simple-minded, possibly leaving their elderly on a mountain to die. In fact, studies of modern foragers show that they still enjoy more leisure time than Americans do today, and these are foragers who have generally been pushed out of really good lands by farming societies. While no one really specializes in a craft, everyone does a little bit of everything. Eventually, we'll see societies develop where one man is a soldier, another man makes the soldier's armor and weapons, and a third man directs where the soldier will go and who he will fight. A young man in a foraging society would make his own hunting tools, hunt the animal himself, and divide up the meat according to what the society finds fair, which usually means sharing with the group, since you'll need others to share with you one day, and, without walls and houses, everyone knows what you have. Foragers are generally small groups. Women breastfeed for longer, which helps suppress pregnancies, and they usually have restrictions about sex after a baby is born to also help avoid another immediate pregnancy. This means each woman has an average of 5 years between pregnancies compared to 2 to 3 for women in farming societies. So in summation, foraging societies tend to be egalitarian, making decisions together as a group, lack permanent leaders, have little to no inequality since resources are shared, have members who do many tasks well instead of specializing in one task, and tend to lack written language. These are important features to keep in mind as we see the development of societies that begin to diverge from these features. So let's get to one society that begins to take a different path. We're looking at the Near East, also called Mesopotamia. Here's a map with the modern countries on it to give you a better idea of where we're focusing on. Around 13,000 to 10,000 years ago, the Natufian culture, the final culture of the Paleolithic age in this era of the world, was undergoing some kind of stress that led to sedentism. Of course, the term Natufian is just one that we apply to people living in several sites 14,500 to 11,500 years ago, who may have had differences in language or culture between them, but seem to have developed a similar lifestyle. We can see changes in the environment that may have contributed to this. 20,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum occurred and huge amounts of water were frozen in the glaciers. Then, the temperature of the Earth rose around 14,000 years ago, providing foragers in the Near East with more water, more plant growth, and the opportunity to have a larger mobile group that the environment could support. This is known as the Younger Dryas. Then, at 12.8 to 11.5 thousand years ago, the temperature dropped again. This most likely means that the environment which had been able to feed more and more foragers now could not support them all. Enter the site we know as Ainan or Ain Malaha. The Natufians living around 11,000 years ago built this site, which is one of the first in the world with evidence for permanent living or sedentism. At nearly the same time, we begin to see evidence of grains which appear different from the wild grains in the area. Grains are generally not part of foraging diets. They are a form of grass with little nutritious value and are filled with sugars that cause cavities. We can surmise that resorting to eating wild grasses was a strategy to feed a large group that had depleted more nutritious options. So what archaeological evidence suggests this story? We have the suggestive environmental factors and the stone walls. We also find at Ainan or Ain Malaha blades with a kind of shine on their edges. This sickle sheen comes from cutting grass plants like wheat, which actually have tiny bits of sand in their stalks, which sand the blade as you cut into the stalks. There are wheat kernels which were dropped into a fire, carbonized, and therefore preserved. There are pestles and mortars for grinding grass seeds. But there are also large animal bones, and both the carbonized seeds and the animal bones are from wild plants and animals which have different features than domesticated varieties. So it seems that people were eating wild forms of wheat before they began cultivating domestic wheat at Ainan or Ain Malaha. They were sedentary before farming, but the two did happen in tandem with each other. Keep in mind that domestication is the modification, either intentionally or unintentionally, of plants or animals. It's highly possible that in the Near East, wheat domestication was an accident. If sedentism happened first, and people went out from the village to gather wild wheat, they would carry that wheat home. As they walked, loose kernels would fall out first. By the time they got to the village, only the toughest kernels would still be attached. When those tough kernels fell off, they would grow close to the village. Over time, this produces a radius where tough kerneled wheat grows near the village and weaker kerneled wheat grows further away. With enough wheat generations, this can create a new variety of domesticated wheat. However, once wheat was domesticated, the process was replicated with barley and other grass varieties across the Near East. After plant domestication spread, we also see animal domestication beginning with goats and indicated by the presence of both goat dung and baby goat bones in villages. At this point, we call this age the Neolithic for the Near East, since stone tools get more complex. These terms can get confusing, and you won't be tested or quizzed on them, but please take a look at the timeline I've uploaded in the reading sections of this week for a basic outline. With farming and sedentism came major social changes. The first change was a dip in life expectancy, since grains are a less healthy diet, along with serious tooth issues due to the sugar, grain, and ground stone that appears in ground wheat. Other changes were less obvious, but can be seen through the archaeological record. If you have surplus food, even if it's not quality food, then not everyone in your society has to farm. That means they can begin to specialize in some other task. That surplus food also has to be stored and managed somehow. So, at a village called Tel Es Sawan in modern-day Iraq, which was occupied from around 7,400 to 5,400 years ago, we see what appears to be a grain storage room. We also see that in front of the doorway, they would connect a string from each side with a clay ball with an inscription on it. This is a kind of early lock. The inscription on it described who was allowed to go into that room, which means, logically, some people were not allowed into it. While the clay lock wouldn't have prevented a break-in, it would have shown it by being broken. From this, we can see that some people have control over resources and others do not. At Tel Kosak Shamali, another site from the same period, which we call the Ubaid period, we see obsidian blades which are made from volcanic glass, and there is no volcano in the immediate area. This means that long-distance trade was happening, and that not everyone got these fine items from far away. Furthermore, keep in mind that with people in closed-off houses, the ability to hide things from your neighbors grows. And since there is a surplus, some people will have more than others. Farming is therefore definitely linked with the rise of inequality, and Diamond and others have argued that it produced large-scale warfare by allowing for some people to become specialized warriors, and that it put pressure on women to have more children to work farms, relegating them to the childbearer role. Before we leave off the lecture, it's worthwhile to consider that in different parts of the world, different groups of people had different strategies. The development of agriculture took around 6,000 years, so it was a fairly slow revolution. Foraging, as we discussed, is collecting food found in nature and was the only method used for thousands and thousands of years prior to horticulture and agriculture. Horticulture is small-scale cultivation of crops by small communities using simple hand tools, and can be done by sedentary or mobile groups. Agriculture refers to intensive farming of large plots of land using irrigation, fertilizers, plows, etc., and usually goes hand in hand with sedentism, though there is at least one known case of sedentary people who were foragers in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, where the environment was lush enough to support a huge population without farming. Pastoralists rely on domesticated animal herds for their subsistence, but usually interact with agriculturalists. Humans are inventive, and there are always unexpected cases, but the changes we've discussed that accompany sedentism in farming are the general rule.